if the Rangers advance to the final, Howie can't do it because he has to fulfill his duties with the Rangers. Would you be interested in calling the Stanley Cup final if the Rangers get there? You know, it didn't even take me a millisecond to answer the question. I do have to remind myself to keep it 50-50 right down the middle. Have to get as excited when the opponent scores as when the Rangers do. And we have something in front of us during all broadcasts called the cough button. If you have to cough or sneeze or do anything else, you can turn your microphone off by hitting the cough button. And I would just have to reach for it when I anticipated the hiccups coming on. The one sport that I called that I felt like I had no idea what I was watching, and I only called it once, was...
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. This podcast is not about ALS or living with disabilities. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I am a father of 5 with a marriage that's lasted for over 33 years. I am a #1 New York Times best-selling author of 41 books, an NFL first-round pick with an 8-year career. I worked on TV for Fox Sports, Good Morning America, Court TV, and Extra. I've hosted BattleBots, A Current Affair, and Find My Family. And I am also a practicing attorney. In this podcast, we're diving into real-life stories. From triumphs to trials, we'll explore the extraordinary in the ordinary. Join me, Tim Green, and my son Troy each week for real conversations, laughter, and insights. Because life is a journey, and everyone's got a story. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Kenny Albert, you are a workhorse and a broadcasting genius. You've practiced your craft since you were in kindergarten, and you are the only sportscaster alive who currently announces all 4 of the major sports leagues in America at the same time. This should be no surprise, though. Your father, Marv, was the voice of basketball and was recently inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Kenny, welcome to our podcast.
Well, Tim, I really appreciate the unbelievable introduction. It's great to be here with you and Troy. I've listened to many of the previous episodes, and we go back a long way, having worked together for 7 years on NFL on Fox broadcasts. First met you in 1994 when we both had our auditions in Los Angeles. We actually met out at the pool. If I remember correctly, you and Joe Buck did an audition together. I did mine with James Lofton, and we all met for the first time at the hotel pool right after that. And we started working together in 1996, 7 unbelievable years. And, I think back to our time together often and some of those games that we called. So it's great to reminisce with you guys here today.
Yeah, most of my childhood memories of going to games, I was born in 94. So most of my childhood memories of going to games with when you guys were announcing them. So I've got a lot of, I was 5 years old in the box with you guys, in the booth with you guys, but it was always so much fun.
Well, I remember you coming around and your siblings, and I have some pictures. I was going through pictures recently, and many of the young Greens were in those photos, and it was, such a great time, 1996, and then 7 years together. And I actually pulled out, I'm sort of an organized hoarder. I keep all of my my research and spotting boards, and these are from our first season together, 1996, with all the depth charts and the player information. The one I'm looking at now was our second game together, Atlanta Falcons, Minnesota Vikings, Week 2 in 1996. There it is.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you keep those all in like a man cave? How do you keep all that?
There's a huge file cabinet to my left here in the home office. And, I'm sort of old school. I do most of my work by hand, although I obviously, read a lot on the computer or the iPad, use a lot of technology. But a lot of the preparation when I'm getting ready for the games is still by hand. I feel like I can remember it more if I'm writing it down. And then I'll refer back if I have a game this week, as we tape this, New Orleans Saints, Cleveland Browns this Sunday, for example. So I've worked games involving those teams this year. So I'll go back and, carry over a lot of that information, which definitely saves a little time if we've already had a specific team earlier in the season. I'm not necessarily going back to these charts from 1996, but I keep them all for posterity.
I can't believe you still have those. It's giving me flashbacks to us in the booth about to call a game. Kenny, how young were you when you started practicing your craft? And how, when you were just a kid, did you practice?
I was probably 5 or 6 years old. Um, Having grown up in a sportscasting family, as you referenced, with my father and his two brothers as well, my two uncles, Al and Steve, who were longtime play-by-play broadcasters. They both did a lot of basketball and boxing and hockey. Uh, Not much football. Steve did the Jets on the radio for a couple of years and some baseball as well. But basketball, boxing, and hockey were their main sports. So I was always around it. I grew up around it. I always joke that whenever my uncles came over on a holiday or other family occasions, it was like I was listening to the first all sports radio station. The three of them would be exchanging stories about their various games that they worked, about the teams, the players, the coaches. So I would just sit there and let everything sink in via osmosis. And like I said, when I was about 5 or 6, my parents bought me a toy tape recorder for my birthday. And I would set up my room like a radio or a television studio. I had the desk on one end and my bed in the middle and the television on the other side. And I would call games into the tape recorder. I still have some of the cassette tapes from the early mid 1970s of these games that I called. And I would also make up games. It wasn't just calling games off the TV. I would have the rosters, all sports, and I would make up games in my head and call those games. And it was great practice. And when I was old enough, I would start tagging along, going to games with my father. Sometimes I would sit in the broadcast booth, other times with my mother in the stands. But when I was in the booth, I would again let everything sink in. Um, just listening to the communication between the play-by-play announcer and the color analyst, the communication with the producer or the production truck if it were a TV broadcast, and just learned so much during those years growing up around it. And then, really, my first huge break came when I was in high school in 10th grade, growing up on Long Island. And I went to high school in Port Washington, and there was a small cable station in a neighboring town, Cox Cable of Great Neck. And they happened to come to my school in January of 1984. I was about to turn 16, and they had two cameras and they had a little production van and no announcers, and they came to film a girls basketball game. And the athletic director at my school, who I had a relationship with because I covered a lot of the games for the school newspaper and the town newspaper, so I was always around the gym and the football field and the baseball field covering the games. The producer, Roy Menton, then gave me an opportunity when I was introduced by the AD. He said, "Sure, we'll clip a microphone onto your shirt. You can announce the game for us." So I was sitting in the second row. The people around me probably thought I was nuts talking to myself, but I was actually announcing the game into this little microphone. And I spoke to the producer, Roy, the next day, and he gave me the opportunity over the next 2.5 years, the remainder of my high school years, to call about 75 or 100 games in all different sports, basketball, football, baseball, hockey, soccer, lacrosse, really anything on the schedule. I was their guy. And I would bring friends along as the color analysts, and they had a lot of fun with it. But
That's
thinking
awesome.
back, these days, kids in high school, there are opportunities out there. There are sportscasting camps in the summer. Many high schools now have stations, TV stations, internet broadcasts of sporting events, streaming. That wasn't the case back then. So I had a 3-year head start on anybody else who really wanted to get involved in college. And looking back, it was such a great opportunity, just getting the reps and doing these games, and um, the experience was invaluable.
What would you say to if there was a young, kid now or a listener now who wanted to get into it? What would you do if you had to kind of go back and do it again? But obviously now with
Right. And I speak to a lot of youngsters, whether in high school or college. I'm usually a guest speaker at 3 or 4 sportscasting camps in the New York, New Jersey area every summer. And I hear from others via email, through social media. So I try to listen to their work, if they would like a professional to lend an ear. And the best advice that I always give is try to do as much as you can, similar to what I did back in high school and college, whether it's internships, actual on-air work. When I was in college at NYU, believe it or not, a school with 40,000 students, there were only 5 of us who wanted to get involved in calling sports at the radio station. We had a great Division III athletic program, so my friends and I would work the men's and women's basketball games, but we would rotate positions: play-by-play, color analyst, sideline reporter, producer, engineer, statistician. So we all would, be able to take part in the various jobs that were involved, and that's part of the advice that I give youngsters: do as much as you can, even if it's not the exact area that you'd like to get into, because you never know where something might lead.
It's so unique to have someone find their passion that young. What was your relationship like with your siblings growing up?
It was great. I'm the oldest of 4. I was an only child. In fact, I was born 3 months premature. So I was actually in the hospital for 2.5 months in an incubator. I had a twin brother who did not survive. My parents didn't know they were having twins. Um, we came out 3 months early. So it was a fight for survival right from the start. I was 1 pound, 15 ounces when I was born, and then actually went down to 1 pound, 8 ounces. Was born February 2nd, came home from the hospital in early April. So I was an only child for 5 years, 5.5 years. And then all of a sudden there were 4 of us. My parents adopted my sister, Jackie, who was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I was 5, and I'll never forget the ride going to pick her up. She was 2 days old. And then all of a sudden, about a month later, my mother was pregnant with twins. So Brian and Denise were born. So I'm the oldest of 4. We had a great relationship growing up. We would always do things in 4s, whether it was doctor appointments, dentist appointments, you name it. It would be 4 in a row. So just great memories. We would rotate going on trips with my father if he had a game in Philadelphia or Washington or Boston. I would also tag along a lot. He was doing the local news at WNBC in New York. I had the opportunity to go work Olympics in a behind-the-scenes role twice, and I've called many Olympics since then. But again, just being able to tag along was an unbelievable experience, great memories, and my siblings had that opportunity as well.
Did your parents adopt because they did not think they'd get pregnant again, and they did, or just?
Yeah, that was from what I remember, that was what happened. So they were on a list for a long time, and I remember when we got the phone call that she was born, and we were in the car the next day to head to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and then ironically, my mother was pregnant with twins a month later. So we had the triple stroller. It was almost like they were triplets. They were in different grades in school, but only 10 months apart.
That's amazing. Nothing is better than kids. Who was your best friend growing up, and what kind of adventures did you have?
That's a great question. I was so fortunate to have a lot of friends in school. We lived on Long Island, as I referenced earlier, and I rode my bike everywhere. It was so much different in those days with no cell phones, and you spent so much time outside playing basketball, hockey, throwing a football around, little league baseball. So, I just remember riding my bike to friends' houses. Dale DeLeo was my best friend from 1st through 4th grade, and he had an older brother who played hockey, and we all wound up playing on the high school club team together 10, 11 years later. But I would ride my bike down a big hill to their house, and we would be outside in their backyard. A number of other good friends, during those days, elementary school. Then around 6th, 7th grade, Adam Holzer, who I was just texting with a little while ago, became a good friend, and he works in the sports TV industry. He's been with various networks on the advertising sales side. Worked at Fox for a while, among others, and he was one of the friends who I brought along as color analyst when I did some of those games in high school. When I was 11 years old, I went to summer camp in Monticello, New York, and by coincidence was assigned to a bunk with 6 or 7 other kids, including Rich Ackerman. And we met for the first time at camp that year, 1979. And He immediately became a close friend. We wound up as college roommates at NYU together. We did radio for 4 years, and he's gone on to a long career in radio broadcasting. He's done some television play-by-play as well. He's worked at WFAN and CBS Sports Radio for about 25 years now. So we first met at summer camp back in 1979. And then so many others moving on into the later years. Dave Brooks, Barry Hockhauser, Eric Merlis at NYU. And I know Tim knows a lot of these guys because they helped out doing statistics and spotting with us in the booth during football broadcasts. Eric Spitz, a longtime radio executive, is a close friend. Ben Boma, my longtime statistician and spotter, who Tim also knows. So a lot of friendships that have lasted 20, 30, 40 years. But when I think back to that time growing up on Long Island, it was a lot of time outdoors, just playing sports, riding the bike, going to various friends' houses.
Were you glued to the sports pages as a kid? It seems like a big trend in sports broadcasters.
I was. I'm a big reader. As you probably remember from the time that we worked together, I was always reading articles, clippings about the teams that we were about to broadcast. I learned that at a young age. That's something I learned by observing my father, my uncles, other broadcasters who I had the opportunity to be around. And it was so much different back then. There was no internet, no cell phones, obviously. You couldn't just read an article, with one click of a button on a laptop. When I was growing up, it was daily newspapers, weekly publications. I mean, when I first started at Fox in '94, the same year Tim did, at that time, they were sending us articles via a fax machine where you had to buy these big rolls of paper. And again, this is pre-internet. And every day we would get 20, 30 pages on this big ream of fax paper. That's how they would send us the articles to read about the teams that we would be broadcasting. Back then, they sent us VHS tapes of each team's previous game, and we wouldn't get those until Wednesday. Now you can watch any game at any time on your phone, your laptop, your computer. I still read several newspapers a day, although now I'm doing it on the iPad, but it still looks like the actual newspaper. You're not just clicking on articles, so I'm old school in that respect. I'm reading, keeping up with the various sports that I'm involved with. A couple of hours of reading every day for sure. When I'm on an airplane, I take advantage of the time and get a lot of that work done, the reading done. I feel like reading knowledge, it's the best way to learn. And, I've obviously read several of Tim's books, but I don't have a lot of time during October through June, which is the bulk of, football starts September, but then the other sports I work start in October and go all the way until May and June. So I'm reading so much for work and the prep that I don't have a lot of time to read books, but I feel like I read the equivalent of 5 to 10 books every week. So there's a lot of reading. It's fun. I mean, it's not like I'm doing something I hate. I love my job, love the preparation. There's a lot of work and travel involved in it, but there's really nothing else I would rather be doing. And the reading and the preparation is a big part of it.
I know you're a sports fanatic, but which one was your favorite as a kid and why?
I get that question a lot, especially at the sportscasting camps every summer. And I wrote about it in my book as well, which was published about a year ago. I loved all sports as a kid. Hockey was probably a little bit above the others, but it was so close. I mean, I would watch every NFL game that I could, basketball, baseball. Played all sports as a youngster, but hockey was the one that I really gravitated to. I played club hockey in high school and college. Was never anywhere close to being an elite athlete, but it was just so much fun to be involved. My goal when I was in college was to do hockey play-by-play on the radio. That was what I wanted to do. Never dreamed that I would be involved in so many different sports. Several of us were really fortunate in 1994 to be in the right place at the right time when Rupert Murdoch basically stole the NFC package away from CBS, who had it for about 35 years. And whether it was myself, Joe Buck, Kevin Harlan, Tom Brenneman, four young play-by-play announcers at the time. On the color analyst side, Tim, Matt Millen, uh, Anthony Munoz, Ron Pitts, who had all recently retired from their NFL careers and were all hired as color analysts by Fox. Never in my wildest dreams would I ever have imagined doing NFL football on the network side, especially at the age of 26, because it just didn't happen back then. Prior to Fox coming into the NFL picture, CBS and NBC had all of the Sunday games, and the play-by-play announcers were all veterans in their 40s and 50s, legends who had been doing it for a long time. So Rupert Murdoch and Fox making that bid for the NHL really changed a lot of our lives, to be honest. I've been so fortunate to be at Fox now 31 years. Joe Buck's had a Hall of Fame career, Tim's first partner. Kevin Harlan's had a fabulous career. Tom Brenneman's had a great career. So we were all very lucky. And to get back to the original question about favorite sport, it's like apples and oranges. It's hard to choose one. I'm so lucky to be involved in several. There's nothing like the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I've had the opportunity to call 2 Stanley Cup finals on the TV side, several others on radio, scheduled to call the Stanley Cup this year on TNT. But there's also nothing like 1 o'clock on a Sunday when an NFL game kicks off and you're on the call. And I've been fortunate to call 5 divisional playoff games and a Pro Bowl and the international feed of a Super Bowl. So just real lucky to be involved in football and hockey are the 2 sports that I'm the most heavily involved in. I do have the opportunity to do some baseball and basketball, which I also love as well. And I've also done some various other sports, boxing at the Olympics. I've worked track and field, volleyball, water polo this past summer. So those were a lot different, but they've been a lot of fun too.
How about specific teams? Who were your favorites?
Well, growing up, I rooted for a number of the New York teams in football, the Giants and the Jets. They really didn't play each other much back then, and they were the teams that we got on television on Sundays. So I rooted for both. In baseball, I was somewhat of a front runner. I was a Yankees fan in the 70s when they were winning, and then I became a Mets fan in the 80s when they were winning. For some reason, I was a Vancouver Canucks fan in hockey. They played 3,000 miles away. No idea why. But also the Rangers. And they played each other in the Stanley Cup final in 94. And again, I was so fortunate to be on the call for that one for NHL radio, national radio call. And as you guys know, I've been with the Rangers calling their games on radio since 1995. This is season number 29. So just love working at Madison Square Garden, love working for the Rangers, calling the games. They've had an unbelievable run over the last 15 years or so. Ever since Henrik Lundqvist came in as a rookie in 2005, they made the playoffs 11 out of the first 12 years. They've had a great run recently, getting to the Eastern Conference final 2 of the last 3 years. Basketball, it's always been the Knicks. Knicks fan as a youngster. Was a little too young to remember the 1970 championship. Do have some memories of the 73 championship. And I also have had the opportunity over the last 15 years or so to work about 15 to 20 Knicks games every year on MSG television with the legend Walt Clyde Frazier, who is one of the top 50 greatest players in NBA history, but an even better person. So those games are a lot of fun. So hard to pick one. Fortunately, I don't have to. Love them all. And right now is the crazy time. I have this coming week 2 hockey games, a basketball game, and a football game to prepare for.
When you're calling games, we talked about this with Joe Buck a little bit on episode 4, but when you're calling like a national game and you're not supposed to be biased or be rooting for anybody, is that less fun than if you're on MSG Network and you can kind of, I don't know, feel the passion with the fans?
Right. I wouldn't say it's necessarily less fun, but it is different. And Joe went through it when he was still calling St. Louis Cardinals games and was doing national games on Fox. I do go back and forth during the hockey season calling national games on TNT on Wednesdays and then throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs, but also calling Rangers games on the radio throughout the season. And when I do a Rangers game on TNT, for example, or on NBC in past years, I do have to remind myself to keep it 50-50 right down the middle. have to get as excited when the opponent scores as when the Rangers do. And a lot of us have gone through this. The great Doc Emmerich was the voice of hockey in the United States for decades. Recently retired about 4 years ago, but he was with NBC for a long time and various other networks. But he also called New Jersey Devils games, so he went through the same thing. And the Devils had some deep runs in the playoffs during that time. Joe Buck, like we said, Joe Davis with this recent World Series. He's the voice of the Dodgers, but he calls the World Series on the Dodgers and the Yankees. So in the various sports, it happens. It's a lot of fun going back and forth between television and radio. There are big differences between those two mediums, so it's fun to be able to do both.
Did you have any other interests growing up, or was it just all sports?
You know, I was pretty much following sports, watching games, playing sports most of the time. You know, I certainly had a lot of other interests, just like other kids my age. You know, like I said, I was riding my bike all the time and watched a lot of TV and went to movies. But sports was a huge part of it, having grown up around it and knowing at a young age that I wanted to do this and get into the business. So I was constantly watching games on television, listening to games on the radio, going to games. So I would say that took up a pretty big chunk of the childhood.
Could you tell us the story about your first work experience? It wasn't the typical way. It was keeping emergency stats for your dad. How old were you at that point?
Yeah, that was really the first time that I was put to work in the broadcast booth. You really did your research. I was 7 years old at the time, 1975, and it was probably the first trip that he took me on. It was a birthday present. My birthday is in early February, so he took me along to a Rangers Washington Capitals game in February 1975, and we took the train to DC and we did some sightseeing. I still have a photo of the two of us outside the White House, you know, outside the fence, but you could see the White House behind us. And the game was actually delayed about 2 hours. There had been an ice show, an ice capade show the night before, and the ice had been a different color for this show, and they had trouble converting it back to the white ice for hockey. And it took some extra time. So the game started about 9 o'clock at night. And the person who was hired as the statistician, he had a really early flight the next morning. So he left after the second period. So they handed the duties over to me to keep score. And in hockey, it's pretty easy. You're just writing down the goals and the assists and the penalties that are announced over the public address system. It's not as complicated as keeping the stats in some of the other sports would be. So I handled the third period of that game in February of 1975. That was the first official time that I worked in a broadcast booth.
Were there any goals or assists? Like, did you have to do it?
There were some, and I remember doing the research before I wrote my book because I included the story. So there were a bunch of goals. So hopefully I passed the test.
Well, you passed the test enough to still be working in the business to this day, and you also wrote for a local paper as a kid. Did you ever consider print journalism instead of being a broadcaster?
I did a lot of writing during my high school and college years. There were more opportunities on that side of it than broadcasting when I was in 8th, 9th grade. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I had the great fortune to have Cox Cable come to my school in 10th grade, and that led to so many games on the broadcast side. But when I was in 7th grade is when I really started to contact some of the local newspapers in our town. There were two of them. And my first assignment was in 7th grade to cover a high school sporting event. And I loved it. I loved just being around and seeing my name in print on the byline in the Port Washington Mail-in Reporter. That was the name of the secondary newspaper. And then in 8th grade, I noticed that the Port Washington News, the main paper in town, did not have a sports writer. So I volunteered. I wrote a letter to the editor, Amy Pett, and she got back to me and she hired me and she said, we'll pay you $5 a week. And I thought it was the greatest thing that I had ever heard. I would have to cover sporting events. I would pretty much choose the events I would cover. And every Monday morning, my mother would drive me before school. I would have to slide the article that I wrote on a typewriter in an envelope underneath the door before the office opened at the Port Washington News. So I did that for 5 years, 8th grade through 12th grade. I covered the high school sports, also for the school newspaper, the Schreiber Times. I was the sports editor for 2 years. So I loved it. I just loved being around the football field and the gym, the baseball field, lacrosse field, covering all the different sports. I did a little bit of writing in college for the NYU newspaper, Washington Square News. But at that point, I gravitated more to the broadcast side. But I really enjoyed writing. And I think if the broadcasting thing didn't work out, I think that would have been the second choice, would have been to become a sports writer.
It's really so crazy. Like the whole, like, you need 10,000 hours to master something. I mean, you had in 100,000 hours in middle school.
Well,
It's crazy.
just getting the reps, that was the thing. And I think writing has helped out a lot. I'm sure Tim would agree with this. Once I became a full-time broadcaster, being able to edit your thoughts, we would always, and we still do, but the 7 years that Tim and I worked together, we would always Saturday night talk about our opening 2-minute segment when we would first come on the air and talk about the teams. And writing and editing yourself was a big part of that, gathering your thoughts together. So I even think back to some classes I took in college, a copy editing class, for example, and I probably still use some of the principles that I learned from that class while I'm broadcasting.
Okay, so you were in high school and your dad is this famous celebrity. And I have to imagine that you are being recruited like an athlete to broadcasting schools. Why not Syracuse's Newhouse School? Not enough NIL money?
Great question. When I think back, to the mid 80s, and certainly was not recruited as a broadcaster, maybe now that would be the case with young broadcasters able to put their work out there on social media, et cetera. Syracuse is one of the best broadcasting schools in the nation, still is, the Newhouse School. I had two criteria, and call me crazy, but number one, I wanted to stay in an NHL city. I did not want to be away from the NHL for 4 years during my time at college. So it really came down to New York, Boston, Washington. Those were the three areas that I was considering, whether it was Boston University, George Washington, University of Maryland. And then, as it turns out, wound up at NYU. I had never really thought about staying close to home to go to college, but a couple of friends were either there or about to go, including Rich Ackerman, who I referred to earlier, my college friend, and wound up rooming together for 4 years. Criteria number two was that I had heard that at Syracuse and some of the other great broadcasting schools, you might not be able to get on the air until your junior or senior year because there were so many kids who wanted to do this. And at NYU, there were literally 5 or 6 of us every year. So we were able to do games right from the start, freshman year. So I'm sure I would have had an unbelievable experience at Syracuse, but that was my criteria, staying close to the NHL and going to a school where there weren't a lot of kids who were interested in broadcasting at the radio station. Now, I feel like I'm an honorary Syracuse grad because my daughter, Amanda, went there. As you know, she graduated from Newhouse in 2021. Spent a lot of time visiting during her 4 years, and she's now an editor at the National Hockey League. She's doing a great job there. She's worked at the NHL full-time for 2 years, thanks to a lot of the experiences that she was able to get during her time at Syracuse, at Newhouse. Her senior year in 2020-21 was the second year of the pandemic, so she was back on campus. Some classes were in person, some were via Zoom, but she wound up with an internship at the Syracuse Athletic Department and went to basketball games, went to football games, went to soccer games, and edited the highlight packages that they would then put out on their social media, on their Twitter and Instagram. The athletic department used her videos that she put together. So it was an amazing experience for her there. Turned it into a job at the NHL. So I think I'm an honorary alum because I paid a tuition for 4 years at Syracuse. And by the way, Tim, I know time flies. When she was born in October '99, we were working together, and I still have the tape. She was about 2 weeks old, and we were working a Jets game, so it was on here in the New York, New Jersey area. And you sort of announced her birth to the world, to whoever was watching that football game. We threw up a couple of photos, and we actually have used that in a couple of the videos, throughout her life that we've put together. So your voice is preserved on there forever.
You got to send me a copy of that.
Announcement. Will do. Absolutely.
How did you meet your wife, Barbara? Was it at NYU or after that? And how did you meet?
So we met, again, a crazy story, crazy circumstance, and it has to do with broadcasting and with the Rangers. I met my wife, Barbara, on June 9th, 1994. So I actually met Tim about a month before because we had met at our audition out at the pool. That was in April or May in 94. And then I met my wife in June of 94. So I've known you a little bit longer. I've known you 2 months longer. But we actually met, again, a crazy set of circumstances. In 93, a tremendous announcer, Howie Rose, who's been the voice of the Mets for a long time, was with the Islanders, was calling Rangers games on the radio back then. And he had called the Stanley Cup final for NHL radio, the national broadcast, in 93. In 94, the Rangers run a long run. And I received a phone call during the Eastern Conference final. They were playing the Devils in an unbelievable series that the Rangers wound up winning in Game 7 on an overtime goal. Stephane Matteau and Howie Rose had the call of a lifetime on that one. But anyway, I got a call midway through that series. If the Rangers advance to the final, Howie can't do it because he has to fulfill his duties with the Rangers. Would you be interested in calling the Stanley Cup final if the Rangers get there? It didn't even take me a millisecond to answer the question. To be able to call a Stanley Cup final at that age. And it was my two favorite teams. It wound up Canucks and Rangers. So I was calling the final with Sherry Ross on the NHL radio network. Game 5, the Rangers were up 3-1. And another close friend of mine from my days in Baltimore when I called minor league hockey, Jerry Coleman, who I know Tim also met back in the day with me. He's a radio and podcaster in Baltimore for many, many years. We were close friends. He went to college with my wife, with Barbara. He was good friends with her and her two roommates. The day of Game 5 in 94, he happened to be up in New York recording some voiceovers, and he went out to dinner with the three of them that night. And he told me to call him after the game, and it turns out they were still all together. And the only reason I was able to call and meet up with them was because the Rangers lost. The Canucks won that game to extend the series. If the Rangers had won, I probably would have stayed at MSG for some kind of a celebration, a Stanley Cup party. But because they lost, I called Jerry Coleman. He was with Barbara and a couple of others. I wound up going up to meet him at her apartment at the time. And that was the first time we met. If the Rangers had won that game, life probably would have been a lot different. We might not have met. So thankfully, the Canucks won that game. The Rangers went on to win the series. But we've been married 28 years now. We actually got married. Another coincidence. We got married about 3 weeks before Tim and I started working together. Our first season was in 96. And our wedding was in August 96. And I remember flying back from our honeymoon. And about a week later, we did our first game together in Indianapolis. So, Tim was a big part of our lives. Tim and Alyssa were a huge part of our lives back then for the next 7 years. You were born during that time. Amanda, my oldest, was born in 99. Sydney was born in 2003. She's now a senior at the University of Wisconsin. So she was born about a year after Tim and I had not been working together any longer. But just great memories. And, right from the start, Tim can relate to this because of his crazy life back when he was working for Fox and going to law school and practicing law and writing books and traveling down to New Jersey to co-host a current affair, on Mondays and Tuesdays back then. So uh, I think my wife, Barbara, and Tim's wife, your mom, Melissa, were both tremendous as far as dealing with the schedules and really picking up the slack when we weren't there, doing the job of two parents, right? Simultaneously. And, I only have two kids. Tim and Alyssa have five, so it was probably a lot more hectic, but just have to give them so much credit for all that they've done through the years. We always joke that we've been married 28 years, but I've only been there for about 14 of them. I'm on the road so much. So couldn't have found someone that uh, understood my schedule any better and is so great about it. And my kids as well, they've from a young age, I've been away a lot on weekends and have missed certain activities, when I'm either working or away. But I also tried to be there, when they were younger. I was home a lot during the week, so I could do a lot of the weekday stuff that other parents couldn't. So we made it work. We have a pillow, I think, in the family room. It says, it refers to the fact that football season's underway and crazy times are about to begin. So you guys certainly can relate to that as well. And again, can't say enough about my wife and kids and dealing with my crazy schedule.
Both of us outkicked our coverage with our wives. Barbara is wonderful.
Well, she thinks the same of you guys, and we're so glad that we've had the opportunity to come up and visit on a few occasions the last few years. Saw you in Atlanta recently, so it just brings back such tremendous memories of the 7 years that we worked together.
How does that work, Kenny, with who you get who's your partner in broadcasting? Do they just kind of pick for you, and then if it goes well, they keep you together?
Yeah, that's pretty much up to the bosses, the executives. With Fox, I worked my first year with Ron Pitts, the second year with Hall of Famer Anthony Munoz. Tim and I were paired together year 3, and that lasted 7 years. So, when I think back to some of the games we did together, there are certain moments that stand out. Terrell Owens stomping on the Cowboys star when he was with San Francisco and scored a touchdown, and Michael Vick scoring on a 45, 46-yard overtime run in Minnesota to win a game for the Falcons, and so many others, during that 7-year stretch. After Tim, I worked with Brian Baldinger, Moose Johnston, Darryl Johnston, who was Tim's college teammate at Syracuse, along with Tony Siragusa, Rondé Barber, now a Hall of Famer, and the last 5 years with Jonathan Vilma. Love all my partners. Have worked with many others as well on a fill-in basis. Worked some games with John Lynch and Bill Moss and Troy Aikman and Charles Davis and Greg Olson and too many to name, and I'm sure I'm leaving some people out. Worked a Sugar Bowl with Howie Long and Terry Bradshaw. But the 7 years Tim and I spent together, Moose Johnston's the only one that I worked with longer on the football side. So those are my two longest term partners. There must be something in the water at Syracuse, right? Combined years with Tim and Darryl. And then on the other sports, on the Rangers, I've worked with Dave Maloney for the last 20 years, who's the former captain of the team, a tremendous partner. Get to work with Walt Clyde Frazier on the Knicks games, and then numerous partners in baseball. So I've really enjoyed each and every one of them. They all have different styles and, have become close with so many of my partners through the years. And it's really a lot of fun getting to know them. And I'll study my partners before I work with them because you want to ask certain questions about their careers, lead them into certain stories. For example, just yesterday in our game between the Chargers and Titans, there was an onside kick at the end, and now you have to declare it because of the new kickoff rules. And I recalled that when Vilma played for the Saints and they won the Super Bowl, they beat the Colts, and Sean Payton put in a surprise onside kick at the beginning of the second half, and that was a big moment in their Super Bowl victory. So I brought that up to him, and we had a conversation about that. So I think learning your partners' anecdotes about their career is always fun to bring up during the telecasts.
That's really cool. And then another honorary Syracuse degree too. You got 14 years in the booth with those guys. You got to.
Right. I had my father, who attended Syracuse, my daughter, and a couple of great partners. So I'm surrounded by Syracuse Orange.
Please describe what college was like for you. Weren't you broadcasting the NHL's New York Rangers while you were still a student?
College was a lot of fun. When I think back, going to school in New York during the mid to late 80s, even though I grew up 45 minutes away, I lived in a dorm, so I felt like I was away. I wasn't home, although I would go home on occasion. And I tried to get involved in as much as possible, whether it was the school radio station, the school newspaper. Also played club hockey, and that was something that I never expected. My freshman year, and I had played club hockey in high school and really enjoyed it. My freshman year, September, in one of the buildings after leaving class, I see a notice on the wall from another student who wanted to start a club hockey team at NYU. His name was Matt Nafis, and by total coincidence, my freshman year, he started the club hockey team. So I played on it. I handled a lot of the administrative duties with him, and I didn't score a lot of goals, but I scored the first goal. So I'll always have that first goal in NYU hockey history. Late at night against the College of Staten Island at the old Sky Rink, which was on the 16th floor of a building on 33rd Street in Manhattan. So goal was probably scored after midnight. That's when you can get the ice time. We'd play from like midnight until 2 a.m. on Mondays. So I was really busy. I was broadcasting the basketball games, covering games for the paper, playing hockey. And then I would also do the stats for my father and some other broadcasters at MSG during the Knicks and Rangers games during that time. So I might have been busier then than I am now, doing all that stuff during the college years and also going to class during the day. So it was a great experience. As Tim referenced, had the opportunity to fill in on some Rangers pre and post game shows while I was in college, and then wound up working my first NHL play-by-play game, a radio call on a New York Islanders game during my senior year in college. So that was an unbelievable experience, and I used that tape to wind up getting my first full-time job, which was calling minor league hockey in Baltimore, which was also an unbelievable experience. I was there for 2 years with the Baltimore Skipjacks, and I was the radio broadcaster, but I also, at that level, you have to chip in and do sales and advertising and public relations and marketing. So really learned a lot during those 2 years in Baltimore.
I have to tell the story about when your dad got me my gig at NPR. So I'm out to lunch with my good friend Stu Lisson after a workout at the university, and I tell Stu this crazy idea about being an NPR contributor. Anyway, I mentioned that I am going to Dick's Sporting Goods to get a pair of sneakers, and this is before cell phones, and I'm sitting there by myself just trying on sneakers when I hear the manager say, "You're Tim Green, aren't you? I've got a call for you in the back. Some guy says he's got Marv Albert on the phone for you." I was going to hang up on them, but figured it must be important for them to be calling me in the back. So I went into the back office and picked up the phone. I hear Stu say, "Hey, Timmy, I've got Marv Albert on the line. Tell him what you want." I told your dad my crazy idea, and he says, "Yeah, Bob Ferranti is the executive producer over there. Good friend of mine. I'll have him call you." And the rest is history. Do you know that I got my first publisher because of NPR and my job at Fox Sports doing NFL games? I owe it all to your dad.
Wow, I had never heard that exact story. I knew that Stu Lisson had introduced the two of you, and just to fast forward full circle, Stu was one of the folks that took us around when my daughter was touring Syracuse before she made her decision. So I first met Stu with you back when we were working together, and he was a tremendous help and tour guide when we visited back in 2015. But I had never heard that exact story. I knew there was a connection that he had helped you out with, but that's a great story. And I think you'd also love to hear that I had lunch the other day with Ed Gorin in Los Angeles, who was so instrumental in hiring both of us at Fox Sports. Ed was number 2 in command, along with David Hill, when Fox started, and he's also a Syracuse grad. And Ed was so instrumental, like I said, in both of us getting hired initially. And Ed's doing great. He just turned 80. He's out in LA, and we shared some great old memories the other day as well.
When you talk to him again, please tell him I said hello. Kenny, what is the most difficult sport to announce?
I get that question a lot. And a lot of the high school and college students that I speak with, they predict that it's hockey because of all the names, the European names, the line changes on the fly, the speed of the sport. To me, it's probably the easiest, maybe because I've done it for so long. And especially on radio, you're just calling the game. It's a continuous flow for 60 minutes. Basketball's somewhat similar, but it's a slower pace. It's 48 minutes, but the ball's in action for that entire time. Football's the most rhythmic. It's one play, and then it's 20 seconds. It's another play, and then it's 20 seconds. Baseball had been the most challenging because I don't do it every day. I only work about 8, 10, 12 games a year. And there was always so much downtime between every pitch, every batter. Now, with the introduction of the pitch clock over the last few years, it's really helped from that standpoint. There's a lot less time to have to fill. And then I've done some other sports. Boxing, I felt like you always had to try and get your great information in early because it could end at any time. There could be a knockout in the first round or the second round. I've done Olympic track and field, volleyball, water polo, and those were a lot of fun. I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy the variety. But those are sports that I didn't necessarily know the history, the strategy, the rules. So I really had to do a lot of studying. Really enjoyed water polo this past summer at the Olympics. Called it off a monitor from Stamford, Connecticut. Wasn't actually there in person, but it was a lot of fun learning about a new sport. Tim, I know you'll hate me for this because this was one of your sports back in the day, but the one sport that I called that I felt like I had no idea what I was watching, and I only called it once, was college wrestling. Back in the mid-1990s when I was working in Washington, D.C., I was assigned to the ACC Wrestling Championship. And luckily I had a great partner, a great analyst with me because even though I studied and I spoke to an Olympic wrestler, Jeff Blatnick, on the phone and watched some old videos, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I've bought the books throughout my life. Horse racing for dummies, track and field for dummies, volleyball for dummies. That's part of the research. But during this wrestling event, once it started, I really felt like I had no idea.
When you're doing that and you feel like you have no idea, I mean, what do you do? You're just trying to fill airtime, or?
This color analyst was great. He had been a wrestler, so I would just give the details. I would say, here's Troy Green, record of 15-0 from Skaneateles, New York. He's a junior at the University of North Carolina, going up against so-and-so. So I would set it up. I was like the traffic cop. And then once the action started, my color analyst took over and saved the day.
That's awesome. Do you have any good I always think about when you're an announcer, I mean, I've seen a little bit, again, I was young, behind the scenes of, somebody has to run. Like, one thing that I thought was so funny when I was younger is like that I never thought about, and probably being 5 to 8 years old, the immature mind. But I remember a couple of times like people having to like sprint to the bathroom during like a commercial break and stuff like that. Do you ever have stories or things that happen while you're announcing that behind the scenes that maybe you got away with, but you're like, holy cow, how did that happen? Or here's a perfect example, you having to do the stats for the third period of a game. Do you have any other stuff like that that's happened to you throughout your career?
I do. I have a couple of stories. I might hold the record. I once did a 20-inning baseball game and never went to the bathroom. It was 6 hours, 53 minutes. St. Louis Cardinals, New York Mets in St. Louis. I was working with the great Tim McCarver, the Hall of Fame baseball broadcaster. And the thing is, you never expect it to go that long. Once they go into extra innings, you think it's going to end at any time. There was a bathroom nearby. I could have gone, but I never felt like I had to. The biggest difference with baseball is you only have a minute and a half or 2 minutes between innings. In the other sports, football, you have halftime. Basketball, you have halftime. Hockey, you have the 2 intermissions. But baseball, not a lot of time to go. So never went for close to 7 hours. I was once calling a hockey game, a Rangers-Kings game in Los Angeles, and I felt the hiccups coming on. And, that's hard to stop. You don't always know when it's coming. And we have something in front of us during all broadcasts called the cough button. If you have to cough or sneeze or do anything else, you can turn your microphone off by hitting the cough button. And I would just have to reach for it when I anticipated the hiccups coming on. So there are probably some others, but those are the ones that that come to mind as far as funny stories from the broadcast booth.
Did you get away with it with the hiccups, or could people tell?
I think I was okay as far as reaching for the cough button. It was a late night game. I don't know how many listeners we had back in New York. The game was out in LA, so maybe one snuck through, but didn't really hear anything about it.
Tell us about your experience with announcing 4 different sports in 4 days. Just calling football games by itself is a lot harder than people realize. I can't imagine trying to call that many games that close in different cities and in different sports. This is part of the reason why I called you a genius earlier.
You might be the first person to ever use that word to describe me, but thank you. I've had a couple of occasions where I've had 4 different sports in the course of maybe 10 days or 2 weeks, but on that one occasion back in 2009, it was 4 in 4 days. And it's pretty common for me. Last week, this week, as we tape this, I have 3 sports this week. I have hockey Wednesday in Denver, hockey at Madison Square Garden Thursday, basketball at MSG Friday, football in New Orleans Sunday. So 3 sports in a week for me is not unusual, especially in October, November, December when they all overlap. In that case, and in a few others, I was also working the baseball playoffs in October. You have to be real organized. I have a checklist that I go through for each and every game that I work, and it involves a lot of reading, watching each team's prior game, going to some practices and press conferences, talking to players and coaches, preparing charts, looking through statistics. With hockey, there's not as much prep time compared to football. I'm around the Rangers all the time. You're watching the other teams play. They all play 3 or 4 games a week. So you're catching up on their recent games, but I've seen them over the last couple of weeks for sure. Um, basketball, I'm working about 15 Knicks games spread out over the course of the year. So I know the Knicks really well, have to study the opponent. With football, as Tim knows, we could have an assignment week 12 involving 2 teams we haven't seen all season. So you have to kind of catch up on their season. You're watching the film, you're watching the TV tape, doing a lot of reading and research. So again, it's fun work. I would say it's probably 20, 30, 40 hours over the course of the week between the work you're doing on your own to get ready and then the meetings you have with the players and coaches, the production meetings you have with your group. It's almost like you're studying for an open book test. And then the game is on Sunday, and you probably only use 5 to 10% of your information, but you have to have it just in case. You never know what player is going to do something special or what might happen. So you have to really be ready for anything.
I know that you and Barbara are involved with your local temple. My question is, did you ever have to lean into your faith to overcome a tragedy in your life? The reason I ask is because I obviously am in the midst of a tragic situation with my health, and my faith has been a great comfort to me.
To be honest, fortunately, haven't had that many tragedies. Have lost grandparents and, some others through the years. My mother-in-law a couple of years ago, brother-in-law. But, personally, when I think back to the time when I was born, that was probably the biggest struggle for my parents because, again, they didn't know they were having twins. And then one of us passed away within about an hour. And then I was struggling to survive while in the incubator for about 2.5 months. So that was probably, the toughest time for them. But no, both my kids were bat mitzvahed at our local temple. The video of Tim announcing Amanda's birth was, part of the video that we put together for hers back in 2012. So you were a part of that, Tim. But like I said, real fortunate aside from losing grandparents, and I had all 4 of mine until I was 22. So I was really, really lucky. One of my grandmothers lived until the age of 99, just passed away 2 or 3 years ago. But we're thinking about you all the time and your family, and so happy that we had 2 opportunities to visit up in Skaneateles, and then on several occasions at Madison Square Garden. and in Atlanta earlier this football season. So we're always thinking about you and the battle that you're going through, but you're handling it with the utmost in class and grace. And I think you're certainly a role model for thousands, if not millions, of people out there who know your story, who saw the piece on 60 Minutes a couple of years ago. And you've just touched so many people throughout your life, and you continue to do so to this day.
Thank you for the kind words. Kenny, you have recently joined me in another profession, becoming an author. Please tell us about the book and the process of writing it.
Am I 39 behind you, or is the number into the 40s now?
It's in the 40s.
It's up in the 40s. I don't know how you do it, because writing one was such a process, and I learned so much. Having never written a book before, I think the writing part might have been the easiest, because then I think back to the editing process and reading it over and over and finding little errors every time you go through it, whether spelling, grammar, factual. That was quite the process. And then really enjoyed the promotion of the book. That felt like another full-time job between all of the interviews and events that we put together. And it was all great. But it was just so time consuming, and that's just one book. And to write over 40, I don't know how you had time to do anything else, but it was a lot of fun. It's something that I had thought about doing over the last 10 or 12 years or so. Feel like I have so many stories to tell when I attend all of these broadcasting camps every summer. The kids all ask great questions, and I wind up giving the same answers every time, and always enjoy paying it forward. And I felt like, well, if I write a book, it could be a great resource for college journalism departments, young broadcasters who would like to get into the business, et cetera. So started during the pandemic in 2020. I had been approached by a book agent, Andrew Blauner, in New York, Blauner Books. He's a big sports fan, and we knew some mutual people. And he had sent me an email many years ago and said, if you're ever thinking about doing a book, maybe I can hook you up with a publisher. And that was the case. And Triumph Books out of Chicago signed on, and they did a terrific job with it. The actual writing took about 2 years on and off. During some of my busy times, didn't do as much, but did a lot of it on airplanes and hotels on the road. And it was due in September of 2022. So submitted it then. They got it back to me a couple of months later. We went through the editing process and saw the first copies late in August 2023. And it was sort of surreal. I've been a play-by-play broadcaster now for 34 years. I've had one job, to call play-by-play of sporting events. And now to know that I'm an author, to see my name on the front of a book. Walt Clyde Frazier and Wayne Gretzky wrote the forwards. To see their names on there is incredible. Tim and many others who I've worked with through the years were nice enough to write a blurb in the front section. But it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the events, the interviews, publicizing it. I love hearing from different people about what their favorite anecdote was or their favorite chapter. And I'll bump into people in airports, at games, in hotels, and oftentimes they tell me that they read the book and really enjoyed it. And it's so nice to hear their stories.
I used to think, Kenny, that my dad, when he was announcing football games with you and he was writing books, people would ask like what his job was. I didn't know he had a job. I thought he did it for fun. I thought he liked the NFL so much that he played there that he would announce games with you, and I knew you guys were friends. So I was like, hey, he gets together with his buddy and they announce games on TV, but I didn't know it was paid. And then he always talked about reading, and he was always read to us and write. So I just thought he was writing books and doing games with you guys for fun.
And they actually pay us too. That's a bonus. But I don't know how he did it, between announcing, practicing law, writing books, raising a family, simultaneously. Probably didn't sleep more than 3 or 4 hours every night.
This is Dad, I'm talking like you're not here for a second, but one of the best pieces of advice he ever gave me was do everything intentionally. It's like if we were on a plane flying to meet you at a football game and I was tagging along, he would have his headphones on and be literally writing a book while I'm sitting there or whatever, playing Game Boy. And then, but when he was spending time with us, he wouldn't, this is something that I'm personally like struggling with my own kids and like trying to work on is when he hung out with us, I thought he didn't have a job because, he'd be on all fours as the horse and we'd all be trying to jump on his back and he'd be, we called it bucking bronco. He'd be trying to get us off his back and he'd have a parachute. We'd all jump in and he'd be swinging us around over his head. And it's hard now, like your phone, like your phone's always buzzing, your email's going off. But that's the only way when people say that, and he's said this to me before, but again, I'm talking like you're not here, Dad, is everything he did, he was like 100% intentional. Like he could just turn the part that I don't know how you do is he just turns the page like nothing. So we'd go from, dad to he'd get a phone call. He'd be in legal mode. Then we'd fly in a plane. He'd be a writer. Then he'd announce a game. And then we'd come back and he'd be coaching my, little league football. It was just, it was crazy.
Yeah. Just
I don't know.
A good multitasker for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You did a wonderful job with your book. I know that you and Barbara are awfully proud of your daughters, and for good reason. I invite you to brag about them.
Well, bragged a little bit earlier, but I'll give you some more. No, they're great. They're 25 and 21, and Amanda, Syracuse grad, working at the NHL, like I mentioned earlier, as an editor. Sydney, 21, wrapping it up, senior at the University of Wisconsin. She probably has she's got the sense of humor in the family. We're always laughing at things she says or does. Never a dull moment for sure. But no, they're both great. We couldn't be any more proud, and it's amazing how fast it goes because one of them was born, Tim, when we worked together. The other one was born a year after, and here they are now, both in their 20s. But really couldn't be prouder of both of them.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid-fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
I mean, obviously, I'd have to go with my wedding, the birth of my two kids. Professionally, it would be getting hired for various jobs, whether it was the first minor league job with the Skipjacks, getting hired by Fox. Initially, some of the jobs when I was younger, but have to put the birth of both kids and the wedding right up there at the top.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
I guess it would have to be when I was in that incubator as a baby, over the first 2.5 months of my life. I'd have to go with that. I don't remember it, obviously, but that would have to be the answer, spending the first 2.5 months in an incubator battling to live.
What are you most excited about?
Just excited about, seeing my kids continue to, grow into young adults and beyond and have families of their own, continuing to have a great life with my wife and kids and extended family and continuing to work and doing what I love.
Next one. What advice would you give your younger self?
Probably the best advice I would give to my younger self would be to really do exactly what I did, during those high school and college years, working hard, trying to get as much experience as possible. And hopefully it would pay off, which it has.
Do you have any book recommendations for either the listeners or for us?
Any book written by Tim Green or A Mike for All Seasons.
Awesome. And then last one. The name of this podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything that you want to say?
Well, first of all, I had a great time with you guys reminiscing and telling stories. But for people that don't know as much as I do about what Tim is battling through and has battled through over the last 5 or 6 years, do a Google search, watch the 60 Minutes piece and some of the other features that have been done on just a remarkable person. Back when I worked with him, I don't know how he did it. As we talked about earlier, broadcaster, author, lawyer, father, husband, all simultaneously at once at such a high level. But to see what he's going through now and doesn't seem to have any regrets and always has a smile on his face. So certainly an inspiration for all of us, and should be for anybody that knows anything about his story.
All right, Kenny, I got two questions before we wrap up. The first one is, you kind of mentioned this earlier, but you guys announced the Terrell Owens, flexing on the star. You announced Mike Vick with that iconic run and overtime to end the game versus the Vikings. So not just the time with my dad, but in your career, what's been your number one, if you had to pick your favorite call?
It's hard to pick one. I list a lot of them in the book. In hockey, calling the Rangers winning the Cup in '94 is certainly up there. Calling gold medal games at the Olympics. The one I get asked about a lot is the Bautista home run and bat flip in the baseball playoffs in 2015 up in Toronto. I was calling that game on Fox. Football, aside from the ones we mentioned, there were a number of other key moments that stand out. There was just one a couple of years ago, the crazy lateral play at the end of the game, the Raiders and the Patriots, and Chandler Jones interception during those laterals right at the end, scoring a game-winning touchdown. That was one of the craziest plays in NFL history. I had the Victor Cruz 99-yard touchdown against the Jets, which sort of propelled the Giants into the playoffs, one of their Super Bowl seasons. I had the only 8-5 final in NFL history. That was back in '94. I had the only time a punter and kicker combined on a touchdown pass with the Miami Dolphins. So there are a lot of specific memories that stand out, but also calling 5 divisional playoff games, Super Bowl 46, the world feed to an international audience, a Pro Bowl, several college bowl games, the one with Howie and Terry, Sugar Bowl, Notre Dame, LSU, that one's certainly up there as well.
All right, and then I hope this question doesn't get you in trouble, but if you're listening to a game, who's your favorite announcer to listen to?
I have a lot of them, and so many are my friends, but, you can never go wrong with, among the announcers currently working, Al Michaels, Joe Buck, Mike Tirico, Ian Eagle, and I know I'm leaving out some, but those are certainly some of my favorites.
Great. And then this is the real last question. I keep saying last question, but it's important on the podcast. One of the things to us, we wanted to get to a lot of different people, a lot of different backgrounds and audiences. We didn't want it to be just football or announcing or ALS. So we ask every guest at the end of the episode, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should have on the podcast?
Well, you've had some great guests so far. I know you've had Roger Goodell and Adam Fox and Charlie McAvoy, but there are probably so many people out there in the broadcast world, the football world. It's a good question, and I'll think about it, and I'll put together a list for you. But there are a lot of interesting people out there that I've come in contact with, and hopefully you guys will be able to have some of them on in the near future.
Kenny Albert, you are amazing. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. I miss you, partner, and I love you. God bless you and your family.
Well, Tim, you too. Tim, Troy, really enjoyed it. Loved the 7 years that we had together, and so happy that we stay in touch, and always puts a big smile on my face whenever I receive an email or a text from you. So hope to continue to do so for a long time, and best of luck with the podcast and everything else you're both doing, and hope to see you again in person soon. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it, especially with 4 games this week. I know you don't have a lot of time.
I've had even busier weeks. There have been 5 or 6 game weeks at times too.
Well, thanks for squeezing us in. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure. No, this was great. Really enjoyed it.
Barclay Damon LLP is proud to be the law firm sponsor of Tim Green's podcast, Nothing Left Unsaid. For more on Barclay Damon's team of nearly 300 attorneys with regional, national, and global reach from our offices across the northeastern U.S., Washington, D.C., and Toronto, go to barclaydamon.com. I want to thank my partners at Barclay Damon for supporting this podcast, and of course 11 Labs for their incredible technology. If you liked today's episode, a free way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share it with friends. Thank you. A significant amount of these sponsorships go to tackleals.com. for cutting-edge ALS research at Massachusetts General Hospital. If you want to make a contribution, go to tackleals.com.